Good morning, Pa. All right, here we are. Chapter 11, Nephi's Temple. This is going to be good stuff. Good stuff. Among the losses entailed by both the Jewish exile and Lehi's self-imposed exile were those of the Jerusalem temple, the Levitical priests who functioned in the temple, and the sacred relics kept within. Yet, despite these losses, the Book of Mormon tells us that the Nephites lived the law of Moses scrupulously, something only possible if they constructed religious institutions that paralleled and replaced those they had lost. Just as Nephi established a commonwealth of Joseph with political institutions modeled on those of the original Commonwealth of Israel, he also built a temple city in which both the monarchy and the priesthood centered. In their new temple, Nephi reestablished Israelite worship with its requisite priests and sacred relics. Details of the Nephite temple system are likely to have appeared in the lost manuscript, which had a distinctively Hebraic emphasis, offered a narrative of the loss and restoration of Israelite institutions, closely described the Nephite relics, and told Nephite history from closer to its religious and political center, the monarchy, than do the small plate accounts by the descendants of Jacob. The latter small plates narrative raises more questions about the details of the Nephite temple worship than it answers, including questions on the name of the Nephi's temple, the relationship of Nephi's temple to Solomon's, and the relationship of Nephite priesthood and the priesthood of Aaron's line. How should the reader envision temple worship in the world of the Book of Mormon? How did it replicate and replace, even as it differed from temple worship in the Bible? Let me reread that. How did it replicate and replace, even as it differed from temple worship in the world of the Bible? How, for instance, could its temple worship function without the Levitical high priest and the Ark of the Covenant, which were key to the central Day of Atonement ritual? Behind the published Book of Mormon text, we can glimpse a carefully constructed system of temple worship that included substitutes for the Aaronic high priest, the priestly Urim and Thummim, the relics associated with the Ark of the Covenant, and even the Ark itself, that were likely detailed more clearly and completely in the lost manuscript. The city of Nephi and the temple. As seat of both the dynasty and the temple, Nephi's city served as another Jerusalem. It is fitting, then, that just as Jerusalem had been poetically termed the city of David, Nephi's Jerusalem was straightforwardly named the city of Nephi. That's Mosiah 9:15 and chapter 20 verse 3 and chapter 21 verse 1 and Alma 47:20. The lost pages would presumably have correspondingly referred to the temple that Nephi built within the city of Nephi as the Temple of Nephi. This Nephite model of naming temples for the one who built them, a pattern not seen in the Bible, is documented early in the Book of Mormon, which refers to Jerusalem temple by the non-biblical name Temple of Solomon. That's 2 Nephi 5:16. That this name, the Temple of Nephi, was used in the lost pages is evidenced by one of the earliest newspaper articles on the Book of Mormon and the emerging restoration. In the summer of 1829, Martin Harris visited newspaper printers in the Palmyra area to persuade them to print the Book of Mormon. Martin told them about the book's content and that its publication was to result in the establishment of a new Jerusalem. Soon thereafter, Jonathan A. Hadley published articles on the Book of Mormon in the Palmyra Freeman, reporting what he had learned from Martin. One article relayed that believes in the Book of Mormon. Let me reread that. One article relayed the believers in the Book of Mormon intended to construct a New Jerusalem with a temple within it. Footnote, Hadley's Palmyra Freeman article, now lost, was echoed in another Palmyra paper, The Reflector, printed at the E.G. Grandin Press by Abner Cole, for reconstruction of what Martin told Hadley about the New Jerusalem. See Don Bradley Building the Temple of Nephi, Early Mormon Perceptions of Cumorah and the New Jerusalem. Cool. Hadley thus provided the earliest glimpse of intentions to build a city of Zion and a temple, one referred to as the Temple of Nephi. Footnote, the Palmyra Reflector stated that the building of the Temple of Nephi is to be commenced. This August 1829 account almost certainly reflects Martin Harris's own ideas and words. Other accounts confirm Martin telling printers he visited about the coming New Jerusalem. Also details such as the name Nephi and even the expectation of a temple could only have been gleaned from insiders like Martin. See Bradley's Building the Temple of Nephi, quoted before. Martin, calling the anticipated New Jerusalem temple the Temple of Nephi, has two vital implications. First, it intimates that the phrase Temple of Nephi was used in the Lost Pages as the name for Nephi's first temple. Second, it indicates that the earliest believers in the Book of Mormon either used Nephi's New Jerusalem and temple as a model for the New Jerusalem and temple they intended to build, or anticipated actually rebuilding Nephi's cities and temple. For his part, Nephi describes his temple as like unto the Temple of Solomon, indicating that the new temple was patterned on the one in Jerusalem that his people had lost. That the new temple of Nephi was not like Solomon's in opulence and grandeur, that's 2 Nephi 5:16, presumably means that it was instead similar to Solomon's temple in structure and function, enabling the Nephite priests to fulfill the same ritual obligations the Aaronic priests had in Jerusalem. How was the Nephite temple system constructed toward these ends? Who was the high priest in charge, and what was the basis of his authority? And how could the Nephites fulfill the law of Moses with exactness without the Ark of the Covenant and its divinely imbued sacred tablets, the touchstones from which holiness radiated out to the rest of the temple? The Nephite high priests. The biblical high priest had central roles in the religion of ancient Israel. Three of the most crucial were his leadership over the priesthood, his performance of the Day of Atonement rituals, and his use of sacred implements to divine God's will. The Aaronic high priest was, at least after the exile, exactly what his title signifies: highest in the Israelite priestly order, supreme leader over the priests. He also, as specified in the Pentateuch, had unique access to the Ark of the Covenant, and used this access to perform one of the most crucial rituals of the year, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. Oh, that's what it means. God, why do I keep forgetting that? Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, sacrifice that would secure forgiveness for Israel's sins. In this ritual, the high priest sacrificed a bull for the nation's sins and entered the Holy of Holies to sprinkle its blood on the lid of the Ark of the Covenant, expanding his role beyond that of ritual and into prophecy. The high priest also possessed and used the Urim and Thummim to make judgments of truth and divine God's will. While the published Book of Mormon says the Nephites observed the various sacrifices required by the Mosaic Law, it does not identify who performed key ritual functions assigned in the book. It does not identify who performed key ritual functions assigned in the Bible to the high priest. It does, however, identify who in Nephite society took the role of leading the priests, as well as who took the role of divining the will of God. The Nephite king as chief priest. In Israelite kingship as reflected in the Bible, Military, religious, and civil offices were combined in the person of the king. See Brett L. Holbrook, The Sword of Laban as a Symbol of Divine Authority and Kingship. These three responsibilities defined the king's role in the protection of society as warrior, the guarantor of justice as judge, and the right ordering of worship as priest. See Keith W. Whitelum, Israel Kingship, the Royal Ideology and Its Opponents, as cited in Holbrook, The Sword of Laban. And I also paraphrase Holbrook in the introduction of this quotation. As first noted by Daniel C. Peterson during the period of the Nephite monarchy, it is overwhelmingly the kings who consecrate priests. Again, see Daniel Peterson's authority in the Book of Mosiah. Nephi, Benjamin, Mosiah II, Zeniff, and Noah are each described as doing so. The first high priest over the temple of Nephi was thus fittingly Nephi himself. The one non-king who consecrates priests during this period is Alma. However, the text makes clear that Alma the First's authority, or Alma the Elder's authority, is derived from that of the king, he having been made a priest by King Noah, Mosiah 11:5, and also chapter 17, verses 1 through 2. And even though Alma the Elder, as leader of the church in the land of Zarahemla, was a higher priest than those he presided over, chapter 23, verse 16 through 17, he was not the highest priest. His authority to preside over the church was explicitly derived from the still greater authority of Mosiah II, who had given Alma the First the authority over the church, that's chapter 26, verse 8, and gave him power to ordain priests and teachers over all the church, that's chapter 25:19. Mosiah II's authority was intrinsic. Alma the Elder's was derivative. While Alma the First was a high priest in the sense of being the immediate presiding figure running the church, Mosiah II was the high priest in the sense of being the highest priestly authority among the Nephites. Footnote: an analogy from Latter-day Saint religious practice may prove useful here. While the designated president of the Quorum of the 12 presides over this quorum directly, he is in turn presided over by a still more senior apostle, the president of the church. Yep. The Nephite king as revelator. The king's position as high priest is also revealed by his role in divining God's will for his people using a physical instrument of revelation. This role was originally taken among Lehi's people by Lehi himself, who consulted the Liahona to guide his family on their exodus. Nephi also consulted this oracle on the journey, and after his father's death absconded with it, along with the sword of Laban and brass plates, and passed these treasures from generation to generation in the line of kings that sprang from him. The Liahona served Lehi and then Nephi's dynasty as a stand-in for the Urim and Thummim, making it vital to early Nephite temple worship. In the biblical books of Ezra and Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, builder of the second temple that replaced Solomon's, told the priests to not eat of the most holy things till there stood up a priest with Urim and Thummim. That's Ezra 2:63 and Nehemiah 7:65, indicating that Israelite temple worship required a high priest with the Urim and Thummim. A Nephite high priest having the Urim and Thummim, or a substitute, would have thus been crucial to reestablishing credible temple worship in the new promised land. The Nephite Urim and Thummim. While the Liahona served as a decent stand-in for the Urim and Thummim, the Nephites later acquired an instrument for divining God's will that much more precisely paralleled the ones used by the biblical high priest. Aaron and his successors had consulted the stones collectively known as the Urim and Thummim, which they stored in the pocket of the sacerdotal breastplate. The Nephite equivalent interpreters also attach to a breastplate and are called in a later revelation the Urim and Thummim. See Doctrine and Covenants 17:1. Intriguingly, the Nephite counterpart to the Jerusalem high priest's most important relic was the possession of a separate set of prophets, or temple priests, but of the Nephite kings, 3 of whom are said or implied to have had this instrument: Mosiah II, his father Benjamin, and his grandfather Mosiah I. Mosiah II, last in the line of kings, passed the instrument to Alma, the elder's son. Alma the younger, who succeeded his father and Mosiah II as the Nephite supreme priestly and political leader. Mosiah II used the interpreters to translate Ether's 24 plates recovered by Limhi's people. That's Mosiah 28, 11 through 17. How did he acquire the interpreters? Although Mormon narrates Mosiah II's entire reign, Mosiah 7 through 29, he makes no mention of the momentous recovery of the interpreters. The interpreters are already with the Nephite monarchy early in Mosiah II's reign, when his people encounter Limhi's people, who had found Ether's plates. We are left to understand that Mosiah II received the interpreters in the transfer of relics from his father. That's Mosiah 1:16. That Benjamin had the interpreters was similarly signaled in the Book of Ether and stated outright in the Book of Mosiah. The Book of Ether says the brother of Jared's record was sealed up with the interpreters by which it would be translated. Then it says that Benjamin had this record and the capacity to translate it, i.e., he had the interpreters. Footnote, see Ether 4:1 in Royal Skousen's edition. The printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon, a typographical facsimile of the entire text in 2 parts. The Book of Mosiah is more explicit, quoting Ammon 1, I guess Ammon the First, telling Limhi, the king of the people who are in the land of Zarahemla, is the man that has this high gift from God, which gift it equates with the things called interpreters. That's Mosiah 8, 13 through 14. We are also given Limhi's response. Limhi was again filled with joy on learning from the mouth of Ammon that King Benjamin had a gift from God whereby he could interpret such engravings. That's 21:28. Footnote says, see Skousen. Note that this reading differs from that of the second printing in later editions of the Book of Mormon. So that's how he was quoting from it. So it was an earlier edition of the Book of Mormon. Benjamin's possession of the interpreters and sealed plates has often gone unrecognized because although it is reported in the Book of Mormon's earliest texts, as quoted above, later editions of the Book of Mormon have his name changed to Mosiah. To preempt criticism of a perceived discrepancy in the text. This is due to some seeing Limhi's rejoicing of Benjamin's possession of the interpreters as a chronological error, though it is not clearly so. And he's about to defend that. Footnote, see Benjamin McGuire, Benjamin or Mosiah, resolving an anomaly in Mosiah 21:28. The order in which Benjamin's death is mentioned relative to the sending of Ammon, the first expedition, need not require that the events occurred in that order. Benjamin's possession of the brother of Jared's sealed record has been rejected by critics who confuse the brother of Jared's record on the sealed plates, accompanying the interpreters, with Ether's record on the 24 plates found by Limhi's people. The Book of Mormon's earliest text thus twice places the interpreters in Benjamin's hands. Nothing is said in the extant text of how Benjamin gets the interpreters, which may imply simply that he received them from his own father, that Mosiah I, whose reign was detailed in the lost manuscript, possessed and used the interpreters is also implied in the small plates. The Book of Omni records, and it came to pass in the days of Mosiah, there was a large stone brought unto him with engravings on it, and he did interpret the engravings by the gift and power of God. And they gave an account of one Coriantumr and the slain of his people. That's Omni 20 through 21. The means by which Mosiah interpreted the engravings on the Jaredite stone record are not specified, But elsewhere, where languages are interpreted, it is fittingly by means of the interpreters. Mosiah II translated Ether's 24 plates by means of those 2 stones which were prepared from the beginning and were handed down from generation to generation for the purpose of interpreting language. It's Mosiah 28:13-14. Mosiah I's own interpreting the engravings implies his similar possession of the interpreters. The declaration of that Mosiah I interpreted the engravings by the gift and power of God indicates this even more strongly. 2 subsequent I wonder if there's something in the name of Urim and Thummim that means by the gift and power of God. Anyway, 2 subsequent passages use nearly identical language to indicate that Mosiah I's successors used the Jaredite interpreters to translate or interpret such engravings by the gift and power of God, or a gift from God. See Mosiah 8:11-14, and also chapter 21-28. In these pages, the translational gift from God is the interpreters. He has wherewith that he can look and translate all records that are of ancient date, and it is a gift from God. And the things are called interpreters. That's chapter 8, verse 13 of Mosiah. Since this gift from God is the revelatory object used of this phrase to describe how Mosiah I translated, identifies him as having that tangible gift. Thus, as Sidney B. Sperry concluded, these sacred interpreters were certainly in the possession of the Nephites as early as the days of the elder Mosiah, who must have used them in translating engravings on a large stone, which had been brought to him. See Sidney Sperry, Book of Mormon Compendium. A question left open in the Book of Mormon's published text is, where did Mosiah I get the interpreters? For an examination of this, see chapter 14. Well, I don't know, because chapter 14 is still ahead, right? Yeah, we're on chapter 11. Well, I can't wait to get to it, personally. I think that's the Mosiaean Reform. Whew. Yeah, it was the Mosiaean Reform is where we'll find that at. If I were to guess, I think it had to do with Omni. Because I love the Book of Omni because it kind of ties everything together. Because you've got the group that Zeniff went down to go retake the land of Nephi. And in Omni, they're like, yeah, we have no idea what happened to him. And it also ties in that, they bring in Coriantumr for a few months. That stone, and I always assumed the plates of ether and the interpreters. But I guess we'll find out. Tellingly, the interpreters appear to have not been handed down through the line of prophet record keepers who held the small plates. Instead, they were handed down through the line of kings. Mosiah I's use of them to translate the Jaredite stone record would place the interpreters in the hands of the Nephite kings, even while the prophetic small plate records was still being passed through Jacob's lineage. Aligning with this, the prophet narrators of the small plates report receiving and passing on the plates, but they say nothing of doing the same with the interpreters or other temple relics. Thus, when the last small plates author, Amaleki, turns the plates over to King Benjamin, he says nothing of turning over the interpreters. See Omni 125. Benjamin did not need to be given the interpreters by Jacob's heir. He already had them. With the interpreters being equivalent to the biblical high priests Urim and Thummim, Benjamin was already the equivalent to the biblical high priest. In other words, the Nephite king was the high priest. Melchizedek as the Nephites' high priestly model. Ooh, this is getting good. Well, I always say that. This is a good book. Prior to the separation of the temple and state under the reign of judges, the symbols of regal power and the sacred implements of the high priests were one and the same. Because the king and the high priests were one and of the same, the model for Nephite priesthood is thus very different from that of the Levitical priesthood, in which the priests comprised a distinct class and lineage. Lacking Levites, the Nephites had to appeal to a different precedent than Aaron to ground the authority of their high priest. The model they chose was the archetypical priest-king Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, Hebrews 7:1. This was he on whom the author of the epistle to the Hebrews modeled both Jesus' role as high priest and the priesthood of the Davidic kings, declaring, "Thou art a priest after the order of Melchizedek," see verse 17 of Hebrews. Rather than being a Levitical priesthood after the order of Aaron, Nephite priesthood was modeled primarily on Israelite royal priesthood after the order of Melchizedek. Footnote: while the biblical model for the Nephite priesthood structure is evidently the royal priesthood of Melchizedek, this model does not account for all distinctive features of priesthood in the Book of Mormon. For instance, when Lehi first goes into the desert, he offers sacrifice, although he is clearly not a priest of Levitical lineage. He is explicitly said in Alma 10:3 to be of the tribe of Manasseh. Possible roots of Lehi's priesthood in a Josephite northern kingdom of Israel tradition are explored in Richly Crapo's Lehi, Joseph, and the Kingdom of Israel. Thus, when Alma, the younger, discusses his own priesthood authority being after the order of his son, which order was from the foundation of the world, he notes that Melchizedek was also a high priest after this same order, which I have spoken, Alma 13:7, and also verse 14. In Nephite society, both political and priestly authority flowed from the ruler, who, like Melchizedek, was both a king and a priest of the Most High God. See Genesis 14:18. The original model for such rulers in Nephite society was Nephi himself, who was a prophet, a priest, and a king. Yet the ultimate model for such rulers was the Messiah, whom the Nephite rulers prefigured. As prophets, priests, and kings, they symbolize the prophet, priest, and king of Israel, and were thus ordained after the order of his son, in a manner that thereby the people might know in what manner to look forward to his son for redemption. That's Alma 13:2. Interesting. Sorry, it's just making me think about how important temple worship has been throughout the history of the Church of Jesus Christ, whether it's the Aaronic version of sacrificing animals or the current version of sacrificing our will and time and effort. The Nephite relics and ark. Where it was not possible for the Nephites to reconstitute the biblical temple system with exactness, substitutions were made. We have seen that the Nephites, lacking Aaronic priests, followed the biblical model of Melchizedek and made their king their high priest. Likewise, since they lacked Solomon's temple, their high priest oversaw worship in Nephi's temple, which was replicated Solomon's in function, but without its elaborate ornateness. As Kevin Christensen has observed, while substitutes for key features of Jerusalem's temple worship were had by the Nephites, they lacked the most important part of the specific temple artifacts kept in the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant, and the cherubim, which adorned the ark's lid. See Kevin Christensen's Paradigms Regained, a survey of Margaret Barker's scholarship and its significance for Mormon studies. The ark, with the relics it held, from which the divine presence was believed to emanate, was literally central to the Jerusalem temple. Indeed, the temple was, in one sense, a house for the Ark of the Covenant, which in turn housed Moses' stone tablets that God touched with his finger on Sinai during the Exodus and provided Israel with an embodiment of his presence. The first temple was structured in concentric zones of sacredness around the ark, with the chamber that contained the ark being the holiest place of all, the Holy of Holies. There the ark served as the temple's holiest altar, where on the Day of Atonement the high priest sprinkled sacrificial blood to secure forgiveness for his people's sins. See Leviticus 16 for that. Sorry, I got to keep track of time. Next is Nephite substitutes for treasures of the ark. I'm going to have to stop there, unfortunately, but I'm just trying to figure out okay, so I had never thought of some of these problems, and I also now understand why there are answers. For example, I never thought of it being a problem that they didn't have Levites to go and make their sacrifices and keep their holy days and follow the law of Moses. It just never occurred to me. Under the same token, that also means that they probably had to have some claim to priesthood authority. So the Melchizedek priesthood will do just fine. That to me suggests that Lehi and Nephi in some way were either ordained before or ordained during their apotheosis type visions to being high priests after the order of Melchizedek. That's interesting. Whew. To me, another interesting change that they did in the church was how most Melchizedek priesthood holders are elders. That unless you're like in some higher office in the church, that it's no longer just like, well, all right, you're about this age, let's make you a high priest. It's now, no, everyone's an elder's quorum, and you'll be an actual high priest or an ordained high priest when you hold a position in a bishopric or in a stake calling or things like that. I mean, in some ways, I think it's a good thing because I don't know. I've always thought that it's a good thing to have determinations and restrictions, just so it's not devalued, I guess. Not sure if there's a better way to put it. Huh. Sure makes me wonder, though. That's interesting. Well, I'm wondering if... Well, it's a good thing we're reading Doctrine and Covenants this year, because I was sitting here thinking, okay, so what is it that the high priests can do that elders don't do? Because when you're an elder, like especially when you go on your mission, you actually get the title elder, which is usually reserved for if you are in other higher structures in the church. But so here you are, a 19-year-old kid with the title elder to go preaching, which is awesome. But I said, what I'm thinking of is that there's just so many. I'm wondering if it's just administrative stuff. I'm wondering if you were to personally try to reconstruct or recreate holy spaces in your home, or if you had to travel abroad, what would be needed for that? That's kind of what I'm wondering about. I'm sitting here musing. What if you had to leave and be 3 days' journey or more from a temple nowadays, and what kind of construction or way can you have a holy temple modern-like? Because here's the interesting thing: is the temple worship back in the day was extremely important for, especially Lehi and Nephi, to inquire of the Lord, keep the law of Moses, make the sacrifices that they needed. In the modern temple, since it has a lot to do around saving ordinances for the living people, but also for the, doing proxy work for the dead, I don't know, I'm used to the idea of you could be a member of the church, but, after you get your own ordinances, you may not step foot in a temple for years if you're out in the rural places of the world, far away from where a temple is, or, you get once a year a trip to the temple kind of thing to just do work for your family members, and the rest of the year you don't see a temple because you're just out in the boonies of Brazil, or you're off in the far reaches of Africa, and, well, now they have African temples, but it's like still pretty hard to get to. I mean, obviously, if you lived out in the rural places of Utah, you had to go to St. George or Manti or eventually Salt Lake City. So getting the Temple of the People is an amazingly big deal. But it makes me wonder, like, if you're trying to, if the old tabernacle or temple that Lehi and Nephi made during their journey, and then later on a more permanent temple that they made when they arrived in the Americas, if that was used not only to keep the law of Moses, but, as Don Bradley points out, it's probably the place where they went to inquire of the Lord. The question is okay, if you're away from modern temples, how does a regular member of our church help recreate holy spaces in their own home so that they can go and inquire of the Lord? If they're not specifically doing ordinance works for those who have, for proxy work or for themselves, if they're not doing that, what holy space can be made in your home to inquire of the Lord? And if, let's say, you were in a world where who knows if there's a temple around still, or access to his temple is not going to be possible, can you recreate a modern temple just like Lehi and Nephi did? I mean, for them, I think they got permission, obviously. There's a lot of things that go into establishing that. But that's kind of a curiosity I have rattling around in my head of what is it that can be done to create a personal space for inquiry. Anyway, those are my thoughts. And we'll continue on with figuring out about the temple and their authority next time. Love you lots, Dad. We'll see you.